Welcome to PSD to HTML5 and CSS3. This video is called Layout, Styling the Content section. In this video, we're going to be primarily focusing on using CSS to style the content section of our website. So this section right here in the white with the 3 columns and the sidebar. In the previous lecture, we focused on using CSS to style the header section of the website. So up here with the navigation and this blue section right here with the computer and the big call to action and so on and so forth. In this video, we're going to take these 3 columns here, everything that has no layout, and we're going to turn this into this. So let's jump in by opening up your code editor and continuing from where we left off. So here's where we finished last time, right here in the header section. And we're going to move on down here into the content. So I'm going to space this out so we can read it a bit better and see what we're working on. And again, this doesn't actually affect your website. It's just for readability, and you can condense it after you're done. Okay, so I'm going to look at the design here. And let's see where we want to start. So here's the final design, the final website. Currently everything's sitting over there. So the first thing that I think that we should do is we should add the container class or the container element around this content so that we can center it. Give the container class, and if you remember from previous videos, when we added the class of container and we wrapped a div around that section, it centered this content. And then this stuff, so hero was the blue background extended to the edges of the browser, and everything inside of it centered. So here you have hero, and here you have container. So with this section, it's all white in the background anyway, so we don't actually need to add any extra markup. We just need to give this content the class of container, and it'll center it. So let's do that. So this can actually you can give it a class as well as an ID. And let's call it container. And from our experience before, we know we're going to have to add the clear fix because we're going to have some elements in this layout that are going to be floating. So this is going to float, this is going to float, and this is going to float. So we know that's going to mess up our layout and we're going to have some collapsing issues. So let's just, because we know that, add the clear fix in there. So there we go. We don't have to close this because it's already a part of this closing div down here. So we're good. We just added an extra element to this div. And let's save that and check out what we have. There we go. So everything's centered in the middle of the browser. We have the container element right here. And now we can actually get started with making things look a little bit nicer. So let's go back to our CSS and find the layout section. Okay, so we're gonna want to do a few things here. We can see in the design that there's a big chunk of padding right here and also down here. And then if you look in our current site, this is stuck right up to the top. Hardly any padding or anything above it. And we have nothing down here. So let's fix that. You can see in our HTML, this whole section is content, the ID of content. So we can select that by giving the ID of content under CSS, and we'll just select that single div that single ID, and we want padding to be 100 pixels on the top and bottom, 0 on the left and right. So that's all you have to write, and we should immediately see a difference. There we go. So there's our padding. You can see the padding on the bottom and padding on the top. So that's a good step. And now let's go back here, to our design. Have a little look. Okay, what we're going to want to do is the column content. What we want to do is set this up now so that we can start floating these guys and creating two separate sections here. So we want this section here, and we want the sidebar over here. So let's find out how wide this section is. Go to our Photoshop document. I'm going to use the grids to find out exactly how wide it is. Marquee tool. And let's grab all of this. So I could see that is 720 pixels wide, but that's including the gutters. And I don't actually want to include that in the width because we might mess a few things up. So let's just include this part, the actual width of the content minus the outside gutters. So 700 pixels wide. So essentially what we want to do is this whole element right here, we want to have that be a section, which it is. It's the column content section. And this is the sidebar section. So we actually want the column content section right here to float left. And we want the sidebar to float left so that it can get this effect right here. If you see these as two separate entities, one section here, and then a sidebar here, then that's how we can visualize this floating up here to the right side. So let's do that. So we want the column content section, this whole thing right here, to have the width of 700 pixels, and we want to float it to the left. So we select it by going like this, column content, select that in our CSS, width 700 pixels, and float left. Let's see what happens. Okay, you can see how this is going to work. It's really dry and empty right now, no backgrounds, no clear definitive columns, but you can see our sidebars in the correct spot, and so that's good. So what we're going to do now is we're going to style our columns, and this is going to take a little bit of work, so follow along, and we'll make these columns work and look just like they do in the design, like this. Okay, so go back to your CSS and head down to the Global Styles section. We're choosing Global Styles because the columns are global, meaning the column styles, they're going to be site-wide styles. So just say we designed another web page, say the About page, and we wanted the columns as well. We wanted 3 columns in that page as well, with different content, perhaps. We want to be able to use the same styles in that page without having to rewrite them. So that's why we're putting it in the global style section, and we're going to be using classes as opposed to IDs. So what we might actually have to do is, let me just make sure that in our markup, in our HTML, so we set up columns. These have the classes of column. So that's perfect. So let's do that. So we'll go to our global style section. And let's start off by selecting the column class. And what we're going to do is we're going to float it left because we want them to float to the left. They want each of the columns to float up beside each other. And we want the margin on the right to be 20 pixels because you can see here's our column, and we have 20 pixels of margin to the right on each of them. So we're going to do that right now. margin right, 20 pixels. Okay, let's just see how that works out. So you don't really see anything because these actually don't have a width. Right now, these containers are filling the entire width of its parent container. And by floating it left, it's not going to do anything because there's not enough room for these three elements to float up beside each other, because that's already, the element is this wide. You can't float something up beside that. So we need to actually make these have a set width so we can float them beside each other and have three definitive columns. And the way we do that is find out how wide they are. And we can find that out by going to our Photoshop document, using the marquee tool to select how many columns. This is 4 columns, 220 pixels wide. So what we're going to do is we're going to add another class to the column. We're going to add the class of 4. We're doing that because this is a 16 column grid and we want to style, you can see here, these are 4 columns. They're 4 columns each. What we might want to do is, in the future, say we wanted an 8 column section and a 4 column. That equals this amount here. So we'd have 8, 4, 8, and then you have an extra 4 here for, if you wanted a big element and then a small element like this. So we're going to do 4 because we want to style a 4 column element right now. So it's 220 pixels wide. And we've set these guys up to have the class of 4. And we know that 4 columns is 220 pixels wide. So the class of 4 has the width of 220 pixels. And that's all you put. So let's see what happens. It looks like it's getting there. But you can see that the husky, which we didn't actually change. Let's fix that really quick so it makes more sense. There we go. The husky isn't floating up beside the crazy dog here. It's not making 3 columns. And why is that? The reason why is because we made this element 700 pixels wide, and each of these are 220 pixels wide, but they have 20 pixels of margin to the right. So the reason why this can't fit is because it's equaling more than 700 pixels, because you have 220 pixels plus 40, 220 pixels, 220 plus 20, 220 plus 20, and then 220 plus 20, but that's actually going over by 20 pixels, so it can't actually fit up here. So we need to get rid of this last, the 20 pixels of margin to the right of this element. And we can do that by going to our HTML and giving the last column the class of last. I'm just going to say last because it's the last one. And in our global styles, we'll add one more selector here. And we'll go last. We'll have margin right of 0. And now it fits. So now we're getting there. So then next, let's see in our design here. It looks like we have a few things here that don't quite match up. Say there's some margin here, and that's kind of a little bit too close there. So what we can do is, let's see how this looks. So currently we just have this section. This is basically the spot where we want more space, right in between here. So we could do a couple things. You can add extra markup if you wanted by adding a div. Let's say div, give this ID of lead in. So now that section has its own wrapper called lead in, And we can go to our styles, and maybe let's go back to the layout. Here we go. And for content, because that's where it is, go lead in and give it the margin bottom of, say, I don't know, 40 pixels. Let's see what that looks like. Looks like it's a little too much, so maybe 30 pixels. There we go, that looks about right. Cool. So now that looks good, let's style this sidebar here.